Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was experimented on by Hydra and became their ultimate weapon. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The chalk dust danced in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the windows of Aldera Junior High, each mote a tiny, silent world oblivious to the crushing weight of reality. For Izuku Midoriya, reality was a 50-ton block of granite, and he was pinned beneath it. "No," the teacher said, his tone dripping with the bored enthusiasm of a man on the cusp of a 3-day weekend. "As third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures." He snatched a stack of papers from his desk. "I would hand out these career aptitude tests, but—" He paused for dramatic effect, a smirk playing on his lips. "Why bother? I know you all want to go into the hero course," the classroom erupted. A symphony of quirks activated in miniature, a girl elongating her fingers, a boy popping his eyeballs out of their sockets, another hardening his skin to a dull, stony gray. It was a cacophony of dreams taking flight, a vibrant display of power and potential. Izuku felt a familiar, painful pang of exclusion. He kept his head down, his hands tucked under his desk, as if to hide their quirkless inadequacy. He wanted to raise his hand, to be part of the excitement, but he knew better. He was a ghost at this feast of genetic lottery winners. Yes, you've all got some very impressive quirks," the teacher placated, though his eyes were fixed on one student. "But no using quirks in school!" A rough, arrogant laugh cut through the chatter. "Hey, teach!" Katsuki Bakugo drawled, leaning back in his chair with a lazy confidence that bordered on a threat. "Don't lump me in with these losers." He propped his feet on his desk, the picture of defiant superiority. "I'm the real deal. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister." The class booed and jeered, but there was no real heat behind it. They knew it was true. Bakugo's quirk, Explosion, was powerful, flashy, and perfectly suited for heroics. He was a prodigy, and everyone, from the students to the faculty, orbited his blazing star. "Ah, Bakugo." "Of course," the teacher said, checking his clipboard. "You've applied to UA, haven't you?" A wave of whispers washed over the room. "UA? The national school? The acceptance rate is less than 1%. He aced the mock exam. That's exactly why it's the only place worthy of me," Bakugo declared, now standing on his desk, a tiny, triumphant explosion popping in his palm for emphasis. "I'll surpass even All Might and become the #1 hero. Not to mention the richest." Izuku flinched. UA. The sacred ground. The pinnacle of his dreams. He sank lower in his seat, trying to become invisible. "Oh yeah? Midoriya," the teacher said, his voice suddenly flat and dismissive. "You applied to UA too, didn't you?" Silence. The air in the room froze, then shattered into 100 pieces of cruel, incredulous laughter. It was a physical force, pressing down on Izuku, stealing the air from his lungs. He felt his face burn with a heat that had nothing to do with Bakugo's quirk. Bakugo, who had been basking in the glow of his own ego, slowly turned. His crimson eyes, narrowed into slits, fixed on Izuku. The air crackled. "Deku!" he growled, the nickname, a twisted version of Izuku's name that meant useless, spat like venom. He slammed an explosive hand onto Izuku's desk, the wood splintering under the force. The shockwave sent Izuku tumbling backward out of his chair. "You're even worse than these rejects, you quirkless wannabe. You really think they'd let someone like you in when they could have me? And no! Wait, Kaken, you've got it all wrong!" Izuku stammered, scrambling on the floor, holding his hands up in a useless gesture of surrender. "I am not trying to compete against you. I swear, it's been my dream since I was little, and there's no harm in trying." "No harm in trying?" Bakugo sneered, smoke wafting from his palms. "What can you even do? You want to take the entrance exam with your mumbles and your creepy notebooks?" The laughter swelled again, a tidal wave of mockery. Izuku just stayed on the floor, his eyes downcast, waiting for the storm to pass. It always did. But each time, it eroded a little more of his soul. The final bell was a reprieve. Izuku packed his bag with trembling hands, his mind already on the hero fight he'd seen that morning. Kamui Woods had nearly captured a giant villain before Empty Lady made her debut. He needed to add notes on her gigantification quirk, specifically its limitations in narrow streets, and the potential for collateral damage. Analysis was his escape, the one place where his mind, not his body, could be heroic. He reached for his most prized possession, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. It was snatched from his grasp. "We're not done here, Deku," Bakugo said, holding the notebook as if it were a piece of trash. Two of his lackeys flanked him, smirking. "What's that, Katsuki? His diary?" One of them snickered. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. "Come on, Kaken. Give it back." "It's mine." Bakugo just stared at the cover, then flipped through the pages filled with Izuku's meticulous drawings and detailed, almost obsessive, analysis. "Hero Analysis for the Future," he read aloud, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is pathetic. You're still playing make-believe." Without another word, he pressed his palms together on the notebook. A sharp crackle and a small, contained explosion scorched the cover and seared the edges of the pages. Izuku let out a horrified gasp. "No!" Bakugo tossed the smoking journal out the open window. It arced through the air and landed with a soft plop in the school's koi pond. "The best heroes showed signs of greatness even as students," Bakugo said, turning to face Izuku, a shadow falling over his features. "I'll be the first and only hero from this garbage junior high. The story is already written. I'm just a perfect, golden boy protagonist. You." He jabbed a thumb at Izuku. "You're a pebble on the side of the road." He started to walk away, then paused at the door, his back to Izuku. "You know," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "if you really want to be a hero that badly, there might be another way." He glanced over his shoulder, a truly evil grin twisting his face. "Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life." The words hung in the air, colder and more brutal than any physical blow. The two lackeys winced, a line even they felt was crossed. But Bakugo just shrugged and walked out, leaving Izuku alone in the silent, empty classroom, the smell of burnt paper and shattered dreams thick in the air. For a long moment, Izuku didn't move. He felt a profound and terrifying numbness. The laughter, the explosions, the insults, they were his normal. But this was different. This was a deep, incisive cruelty that had found the last flickering ember of hope inside him and tried to snuff it out. He eventually made his way outside and fished his soggy, ruined notebook from the pond. The ink was bleeding, the pages warped. He clutched it to his chest, the dampness seeping through his uniform, and began the long walk home, a hollow shell of a boy. The world felt muted. The vibrant colors of hero billboards seemed dull, the triumphant shouts from a TV news report sounded distant and tinny. He walked under a bridge, the cool shadow offering no comfort. All he could hear was Bakugo's voice echoing in his head. "Take a swan dive." He shook his head, trying to dislodge the thought. "No. Kaken didn't mean it. He's just Kaken." But the excuse felt thin, a worn-out blanket against a blizzard of despair. A gurgling sound from a nearby manhole cover barely registered. Before he could react, a monstrous, viscous green form erupted from the sewer. It was a shifting mass of sludge and filth, with two large, manic eyes and a grotesquely wide mouth. "A medium-sized invisibility cloak," the sludge villain rasped, its voice like gravel in a blender. It lunged, and the world became a suffocating nightmare of green and stench. The sludge forced its way into his mouth, his nose. It was thick, vile, and overwhelming. He couldn't breathe. His lungs screamed for air. He clawed at the fluid body, but his fingers just passed through it, finding no purchase. Panic, raw and primal, seized him. "I'm dying. Is this it? Am I going to die?" His vision began to tunnel, black spots dancing at the edges. In the encroaching darkness, a desperate thought surfaced. "A hero, someone, please. Have no fear. For I am here." The manhole cover, which the villain had dislodged, was blown away by a gust of wind so powerful it felt like a hurricane. A colossal figure stood silhouetted against the light, two prominent tufts of hair like rabbit ears, a grin that could move mountains etched on his face. "All might." Izuku's terror was instantly replaced by a wave of awestruck disbelief. It was him. In the flesh. Texas smash! The villain's liquid body was blasted apart by the sheer force of the punch. The wind pressure was so immense that it splattered the sludge across the tunnel walls and completely cleared Izuku's airways. He collapsed to the ground, gasping, the sweet, beautiful taste of air filling his burning lungs. His last conscious thought before he blacked out was, "He's even more amazing in person." When he came to, he was being gently patted on the cheek by his idol. All Might, in all his Golden Age glory, was kneeling beside him. "Ah! Thought we lost you there." All Might's voice boomed, radiating warmth and safety. He had already bottled the villain in a 2-liter soda bottle. "Well, you're safe now, young man. My sincerest apologies for getting you caught up in my villain hunt." Izuku scrambled to his feet, his mind a whirlwind. "Autograph. I need an autograph. Where's my notebook?" He found the soggy, scorched book and flipped it open. All Might had already signed it, a huge, sprawling signature that took up 2 full pages. "Thank you so much. This will be a family heirloom," Izuku babbled, bowing repeatedly. "Of course." All Might boomed, giving him a thumbs up. "Well, I must be off. The authorities are waiting." He crouched, preparing to leap. This was it. The moment. The one question that had defined his entire existence. The one person who could give him the answer. It was now or never. Desperation, a force more powerful than any quirk, took over. As All Might launched himself into the air, Izuku did the unthinkable. He leaped and grabbed onto the hero's leg. "Whoa! Hey, kid! Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much!" All Might shouted, trying to shake him off as they soared hundreds of feet above the city. "If I let go, I'll die!" Izuku screamed into the wind, his face stretched into a mask of terror and determination. "Oh, right." All Might looked for a place to land, finding a nearby skyscraper roof. They landed with a soft thud, and Izuku collapsed, his whole body shaking. "That was incredibly reckless," All Might chided, though his tone was more concerned than angry. "Now just knock on the door, and someone will let you down. I really must be going." He turned to leave. "Wait!" Izuku cried out. "No, I will not wait," All Might said, a strange urgency in his voice. "Please!" Izuku shouted, the word torn from the deepest part of his soul. "You're the greatest hero in the world. I have to know. Can someone without a quirk, can they ever hope to become a hero like you?" He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the answer. This was the moment that would make or break him. When he opened them, the sight that greeted him was more shocking than any villain. The mighty All Might was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man, steam pouring off his body like dry ice. Blood dripped from the corner of his thin lips. "WW, who are you? You're an imposter!" Izuku shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "I assure you, I am All Might," the man said, his voice now quiet and weary. He sat down heavily on the rooftop floor and lifted his shirt. Izuku recoiled in horror. A massive, gruesome scar covered the left side of the man's torso, a spiderweb of ruined flesh so deep it looked like a crater. 5 years ago, the man, Toshinori Yagi, explained, "I fought a villain who did this to me. It destroyed my stomach and wrecked my respiratory system. I've had countless surgeries. It's why I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now." He gestured to his powerful, muscular form that was now gone. "That appearance you know is just me flexing, holding it all in, like a guy at the pool trying to suck in his gut." Izuku stared, speechless. The symbol of peace was broken. The invincible smile was a facade, a brave face put on to keep the world from seeing the man underneath who was slowly dying. "Pros are always risking their lives," Toshinori continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his own experience. "Some villains just can't be beaten without overwhelming power. I'm meant to be a symbol, to stand against that fear. But I'm not fearless." He looked at Izuku, his hollow eyes filled not with malice, but with a deep, profound sadness. A tired pity. "You asked if someone without a quirk can be a hero." Izuku held his breath. The entire world seemed to shrink down to this single, rooftop moment. Tashinori sighed, the sound like leaves skittering across pavement. No, the word was quiet. It wasn't a shout like Bakugo's. It wasn't a laugh. It was a simple, clinical, final judgment. A door slamming shut and locking from the other side. I'm sorry, kid. But the answer is no. Without a quirk, you can't fight villains. You'd just be a liability. You'd get yourself, or someone else, killed. He stood up, his joints creaking. It's not bad to dream. But you need to be realistic. If you want to help people, you can become a police officer. They get a bad rap because they're mostly just cleaning up after heroes, but it's a fine and noble profession. He walked to the rooftop access door, not looking back. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice muffled. The door clicked shut, leaving Izuku alone on the roof. The wind whipped around him, cold and uncaring. He stood there, frozen. The world hadn't collapsed. It had simply dissolved, leaving him in a gray, silent void. The number one hero, his idol, the very sun in his sky, had looked him in the eye and told him his entire life was a pointless fantasy. Be realistic, the phrase echoed, bouncing off the inside of his skull. It was a poison, seeping into every memory, every dream, every page of every notebook he had ever filled. It was over. The hope that had fueled him, that had gotten him through every insult and every lonely day, was dead. It had died right here, on this rooftop, murdered by a quiet, sad, and realistic no. In a nondescript van parked several blocks away, a man in a crisp suit adjusted his earpiece, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. His name was Agent Sidwell, a man who specialized in acquisitions for an organization the world believed long dead. Audio confirmed, he said into a small microphone on his wrist. The symbol of peace has just extinguished the target's primary motivation. Psychological profile indicates a state of extreme emotional distress. The asset is ripe for harvest. Next to him, a severe-looking woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun watched a high-resolution video feed from a drone hovering invisibly high above the skyscraper. Her eyes were like chips of ice. She was known only as the Handler. He saw the sludge villain's weakness immediately, she stated, her voice a low, analytical monotone. While the pro-heroes hesitated, debating collateral damage and quirk compatibility, the boy acted. He identified the physical body within the fluid mass and targeted the eyes. It was a desperate, but tactically sound maneuver. His file is underwhelming, Sidwell noted, scrolling through a tablet. Quirkless. Socially ostracized. Scored average in physical tests. High in academics, but that's it. The file is irrelevant. The Handler countered, not taking her eyes off the screen, where the small, green-haired figure of Izuku Midoriya stood motionless. The file shows us what he is. We saw what he could be. He possesses a martyr's complex, an analytical mind that borders on precognition, and a will strong enough to withstand years of systemic abuse without breaking. We don't need a powerful subject. We need a resilient one. Power, we can provide. She zoomed in on Izuku's face. The drone's camera was so advanced they could see the tears tracking paths through the grime on his cheeks, the utter desolation in his wide green eyes. All might broke his spirit, she observed with clinical detachment. Perfect. A strong will is necessary to survive the procedure. But a broken spirit is necessary for the indoctrination. He has no hope left in the world of heroes. We will give him a new world. A new purpose. And what of Project Chimera's primary component? Sitwell asked. Dr. Zola's serum has been refined, but the artificial quirk implantation is still volatile. The risks are acceptable, the Handler said coolly. The potential reward is a weapon that can dismantle hero society from the inside. An operative who understands heroes better than they understand themselves, equipped with the power to shatter their symbols of peace. This boy is not just a candidate. He is the key. On the screen, Izuku finally began to move, walking like a zombie toward the rooftop door. He is on the move, Sidwell reported. Route projection indicates he is heading home. Intercept point is 3 blocks from his residence. Underpass. Minimal pedestrian traffic. Proceed, the Handler commanded, leaning back in her seat. Ensure it is clean. No witnesses. We are ghosts, understood? Sitwell replied. He tapped a command into his tablet. In another part of the city, the engine of a black, windowless van turned over. Hail Hydra. The handler allowed herself the barest hint of a smile. Hail Hydra. Izuku didn't remember the walk down the skyscraper's stairs. He didn't remember the walk through the bustling streets. The city was a blur of sound and color that his brain refused to process. He was adrift in a sea of grief, his feet moving on autopilot. He found himself walking the same route he always took, the one that led him past the underpass. His hand, as if with a mind of its own, reached into his backpack and pulled out the soggy, ruined notebook. He stared at the signature of All Might, the ink now a messy blue smudge. It was a relic of a dead faith. His fingers went numb. The notebook slipped from his grasp and fell to the pavement with a wet slap. He didn't stop to pick it up. What was the point? It was just a collection of childish fantasies, a monument to a stupid, impossible dream. He left it there, a piece of his soul lying abandoned on the concrete. As he entered the familiar gloom of the underpass, he heard the faint sound of a vehicle slowing down behind him. He didn't turn. He didn't care. It was probably just a delivery truck. A van door slid open. Before he could even register the sound as a threat, a sharp, stinging pain pricked his neck. His eyes widened in surprise. He reached up, his fingers brushing against the feathered butt of a small dart. His limbs suddenly felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. His vision swam, the concrete walls of the underpass seeming to melt and warp. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and his knees buckled. 2 pairs of strong arms, clad in black tactical gear, caught him before he hit the ground. He tried to struggle, to scream, but his muscles wouldn't obey. A black cloth bag was pulled over his head, plunging him into a world of suffocating darkness. He felt himself being lifted, then bundled unceremoniously onto the cold metal floor of a vehicle. The doors slid shut with a heavy, final thud. His last sensation before consciousness fled was the low rumble of the van's engine as it pulled away, leaving the underpass silent once more. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the warped pages of the abandoned notebook. It flipped open to a meticulously drawn and annotated diagram of the hero Eraserhead, detailing theories on how his quirk worked and potential weaknesses. On the opposite page was a drawing of a smiling All Might, and underneath, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Someday, I'll be just like you." A few hours later, in a small apartment across town, a worried mother picked up the phone. "Hello, police?" "Yes, my name is Inko Midoriya," she said, her voice trembling with a growing panic. "My son, Izuku, he hasn't come home from school. He's never late." The world kept spinning. The news would report on All Might's latest victory. Heroes would patrol the streets. But for one quirkless, kind-hearted boy, the world had ended. The day hope died was the day a monster began to be born. Izuku Midoriya was gone, and in his place, something terrible was about to be forged in the deepest, darkest shadows of the world. The first thing Izuku knew was cold. A deep, seeping cold that wasn't just in the air but in his bones, in the metal of the table he was strapped to, in the sterile, antiseptic smell that scraped the inside of his nose. He blinked, his vision swimming. A single, circular light glared down from a high ceiling, a clinical eye in an endless expanse of gray concrete. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the drug-induced fog. He pulled against his restraints, thick leather straps at his wrists, ankles, and across his chest. They didn't budge. "He is awake," a voice said. It was female, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It came from the shadows beyond the light, a disembodied sound that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "Where am I?" Izuku croaked, his throat dry and raw. "What do you want?" "My mom, she'll be worried." The memory of his mother's face, warm and kind, was a desperate anchor in this terrifying new reality. He clung to it. A figure stepped into the light. She was a woman with severe, angular features and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. She wore a gray, high-collared uniform with a subtle, blood-red symbol on the shoulder, a skull with coiling tentacles. The handler. "Your mother believes you are a runaway," she said, her voice as chillingly neutral as it had been from the darkness. The police have closed your case. No one is looking for you, Izuku Midoriya. To the world, you have simply ceased to exist. The anchor slipped. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. No, that's not true. Someone will find me. All Might. The handler's lips thinned into something that was almost a smile, but held no warmth. All Might? The hero who looked you in the eyes and told you your dream was worthless? The man who crushed what little hope you had left? He will not save you. He is the reason you are here. His rejection made you perfect. She leaned in closer, her icy eyes boring into his. You spent your life idolizing a broken system. A world of false gods who preach order while cultivating chaos. You, with your brilliant mind and indomitable spirit, were cast aside because you didn't fit their narrow definition of strength. We are not so foolish. We see your potential. We are going to give you the one thing you've always wanted, Izuku. We are going to make you strong. A man in a lab coat approached with a large, ominous-looking syringe filled with a shimmering, cobalt-blue liquid. Izuku began to struggle in earnest, twisting and pulling against the leather, his breath coming in ragged sobs. No! Please! Don't do this! I don't want this! Let me go! The handler simply placed a calm hand on his forehead, her touch shockingly cold. Do not fight it. This is your rebirth. The world casts you out. We are taking you in. You will be reborn in the image of Hydra. The needle plunged into his neck. The effect was instantaneous. It was not a gentle warmth but a searing, white-hot fire that erupted in his veins, a liquid agony spreading through every cell of his body. He screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the thick concrete walls. It felt like his bones were being ground into powder, his muscles torn from their anchors and rewoven with incandescent wire, his mind fractured. The sterile room dissolved into a feverish, hallucinatory nightmare. He saw All Might's smile turning into a cruel sneer. He saw Bakugo's face, contorted with rage, whispering, "Swan dive," over and over. He saw his mother, her kind face weeping as she faded into dust. The world was breaking, and he was breaking with it. His body convulsed on the table, a violent, uncontrollable seizure, as the refined super-soldier serum waged war on his quirkless biology, tearing him down to his very foundation to build something new, something theirs, upon the ruins. The last thing he felt before the blackness took him was the searing pain giving way to a strange, terrifying power thrumming just beneath his skin. He was stronger. And he was no longer himself. Fragment 1: The Graft. He awoke in a different room, this one more like an operating theater. He was still restrained, but now there was a complex web of machinery surrounding him. Monitors beeped in a steady, rhythmic cadence. The handler stood behind a glass partition, observing alongside a gaunt, skeletal man with eyes that held a fanatical gleam, Dr. Arnim Zola, his consciousness preserved and networked into the facility's mainframe, his voice a synthesized German accent emanating from speakers. The subject's physiology has stabilized. Zola's voice crackled. The serum has been a resounding success. His cellular structure is regenerating at 500% the normal human rate. His musculature and bone density are approaching peak human potential. He is ready for Phase 2, the graft. Proceed, Doctor, the handler commanded. A robotic arm descended from the ceiling, tipped with a complex array of needles and emitters. It hovered over Izuku's chest. He felt a profound, instinctual dread. This was wrong. This was unnatural. The human quirk factor is a biological lottery, Zola explained, his voice a detached lecture. A chaotic variable in the equation of world order. For decades, Hydra has sought to control it, to synthesize it. Project Chimera is the culmination of that research. The arm lowered. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. We are not giving you a quirk, subject, Zola's voice echoed in the sterile room. We are implanting a symbiotic biomechanical nexus. A parasite of our own design. It will grant you the ability to absorb and redirect kinetic energy. You will become the perfect shield. The perfect weapon. The needles pierced his skin, just above his sternum. There was no fire this time, only a deep, invasive cold that spread through his torso. It felt like tendrils of ice were weaving their way through his nerves, latching onto his spinal column, integrating with his very being. He could feel it, a foreign presence coiling in the core of his body, humming with a latent, alien power. The process took weeks. Weeks of being held in a state between consciousness and oblivion, his body a battleground for this invasive technology. He felt it connect to his arms, his legs, his hands. He could sense the low, thrumming energy of the facility's reactor, the vibrations of footsteps in the hallway, the kinetic potential in every moving thing. The world had a new texture, a new layer of reality only he could perceive. One day, during a calibration test, a careless technician dropped a heavy wrench. It fell towards Izuku's head. Without thinking, driven by a flicker of his old self-preservation instinct, he threw up his hand. The wrench didn't hit him. It stopped an inch from his palm, all its downward momentum simply vanishing. A faint, crimson light pulsed from the nexus in his chest, and his hand glowed with the same dull red energy. Fascinating. Zola's voice buzzed. Involuntary absorption. The symbiosis is complete. Izuku stared at his hand, at the captured energy swirling within it like a miniature storm. He didn't know how, but he knew what to do. He clenched his fist, then opened it, pushing the energy out. A concussive blast, invisible but immensely powerful, erupted from his palm. It slammed into the far wall, cracking the reinforced concrete and sending a shower of dust and debris raining down. He stared in horror at the destruction. This power, it wasn't his. It was a violation. A monster they had planted inside him. He had wanted a quirk more than anything. But not like this. Never like this. He began to weep, not from pain, but from a grief so profound it felt like his soul was being torn in two. From the observation deck, the handler watched his breakdown with cold, dispassionate interest. The tool was forged. Now, it was time to sharpen it, and to break the will of the boy who still thought he could wield it. Fragment 2, the chair. The chair was in a circular room, white and featureless. It was made of cold steel, with restraints for his limbs and a heavy, helmet-like device that was lowered over his head. This was where they came to peel back the layers of his mind. Memory is a flaw, the handler's voice would say, piped into the room through hidden speakers. It creates sentiment, regret, doubt. These are weaknesses. An asset has no past, only a mission. The first sessions were crude. Raw electricity surged through the helmet, a brutal, overwhelming force designed to scramble his thoughts and break his focus. He screamed until his throat was raw, his body convulsing against the straps. In the chaotic aftermath, they would begin the recitation. Serpent's coil, winter's bite, iron's will, order's dawn. He fought back. In the quiet moments in his cell, he would force himself to remember. The taste of his mother's katsudon. The smell of old paper and ink from his notebooks. The exact shade of All Might's costume, a vibrant, hopeful blue. These memories were his shield, so they changed tactics. They began to use his memories against him. The helmet would lower, but instead of a raw shock, it would project images directly into his mind. He was back on the rooftop, All Might's skeletal face sneering at him. You can't be a hero, you are worthless. The words repeated, amplified, twisting into a screeching mantra of his own failure. They showed him Bakugo, laughing. Take a swan dive. The image would morph, showing him splattered on the pavement, a broken, quirkless failure. The worst was when they used his mother. They would project the image of her, warm and loving, offering him a bowl of katsudon. But when he reached for it, her face would contort in disgust. A quirkless son? You are a disappointment. You are nothing. She does not love you. The handler's voice would whisper over the fabricated memory. No one does. Your weakness was a burden to them. We have freed them of that burden. We have made you strong. He would sob, thrashing in the chair, begging them to stop. It's not real. It's not real. What is real? The voice would ask calmly. The rejection? The pity? The loneliness? That was your reality. We offer you a new one. A reality of purpose. Of order. You long to save people, a noble goal, but misguided. You cannot save people from themselves. You can only save them from chaos. By imposing order. Our order. Slowly, inexorably, the lines began to blur. The pain of the electroshock, the psychological torture, the endless repetition, it was a tide, and his shield of memories was eroding. The vibrant blue of All Might's costume seemed to fade. The taste of Katsudon grew faint, like a distant dream. The face of his mother became harder to recall without the twisted mask of disappointment they had superimposed upon it. The recitations became easier. Serpent's coil. A flicker of resistance. Winter's bite. A shudder. Iron's will. A resigned sigh. Order's dawn. An empty stare. The day they brought him to the chair and he no longer remembered what they were trying to make him forget was the day Izuku Midoriya truly died. Chimera. The handler's voice commanded through the speakers. A moment of silence. Then, a quiet, monotone response from the boy in the chair. Ready to comply. Fragment 3. The dojo. The dojo was a vast, gray expanse of padded mats and unforgiving concrete pillars. Here, his new body and his implanted quirk were honed into weapons of terrifying efficiency. His primary instructor was a grim, silent man known only as the Taskmaster, a master of 100 different fighting styles. The training was relentless and brutal. In the beginning, he fought like the boy he used to be, hesitantly, defensively. He was beaten, thrown, and broken day after day. His enhanced physiology healed the cracked ribs and dislocated joints overnight, and the next morning, the process would begin again. The chair had erased his sentimentality, but his analytical mind remained, a tool they had sharpened and repurposed. He stopped thinking about winning or losing. He stopped thinking about pain. He started analyzing. He absorbed the Taskmaster's movements, his patterns, his tells. His brain, once used to deconstruct hero abilities, now deconstructed combat itself. He learned Krav Maga for its brutal efficiency, Jiu-Jitsu for its control, Systema for its fluid adaptability. He memorized kill strikes, choke holds, and joint locks. He was no longer fighting. He was solving an equation, and the variable was his opponent's life. His quirk, kinetic redirection, became a seamless extension of his will. He learned to absorb the force of a blow not just with his hands, but with any part of his body. A kick to the ribs would fuel a devastating palm strike. A punch to his forearms would be redirected into a concussive blast from his feet to sweep an opponent's legs. He became a living storm of kinetic energy, a perfect feedback loop of violence. He mastered firearms, disassembling and reassembling a dozen different models in pitch darkness until the feel of the cold steel was more familiar to him than his own face in the mirror. He learned stealth, infiltration, demolition. He was taught strategy, his mind filled with Hydra's twisted history and tactical doctrines. His notebooks were gone, but his mind had become a living codex of death. One day, the Taskmaster sent 5 elite Hydra soldiers into the dojo at once. They were armed with combat knives and stun batons. The asset, no longer Izuku, not yet fully Chimera, stood in the center, calm and still. The soldiers attacked. He moved. There was no wasted motion. He flowed between them like water, a dance of brutal precision. He disarmed the first with a quick wrist lock and a palm strike to the throat that sent the man gasping to the mat. He absorbed the crackling energy of a stun baton against his shoulder, spun, and released the entire charge in a focused blast that sent the second soldier flying into a concrete pillar. He broke the arm of the third, used the man's body as a shield against the fourth, and disabled the fifth with a precise kick to the vagus nerve in the neck. It was over in 17 seconds. 5 unconscious bodies lay at his feet. He stood among them, his breathing even, his expression blank. There was no triumph, no remorse. There was only the successful completion of a task. The Taskmaster nodded once, a rare sign of approval. From the observation deck, the handler watched, her face impassive. The weapon was sharp. It was time to give it a target, the final product. The time skip was not a conscious thing for the asset. Time had ceased to have meaning beyond the cycles of conditioning, training, and cryostasis. He had been 17 for a while now, his body kept at its physical peak by the serum. It had been, by the outside world's reckoning, 3.5 years since a boy named Izuku Midoriya had vanished from Yuzurifu, Japan. He stood in a stark, white briefing room. He was dressed in black tactical gear, lightweight and flexible, with reinforced plating over his vitals. A metal mask covered the lower half of his face, obscuring his freckles and giving him an anonymous, menacing visage. His green-tinged black hair was shorter, more disciplined, but the most profound change was in his eyes. The vibrant, hopeful green was gone, replaced by a flat, dead emerald. They were the eyes of a thing that observes but does not feel. Across from him stood the handler and a high-ranking Hydra commander, Baron von Strucker, a man with a monocle and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Project Chimera has exceeded all expectations," the handler reported to Strucker, speaking of the young man in front of them as if he were a piece of machinery. "His physical capabilities are superhuman, the artificial quirk is stable and fully integrated. His psychological conditioning is absolute. He is the perfect synthesis of science, power, and a broken human spirit." Strucker circled the asset slowly, his gaze critical. He stopped in front of him, staring into those empty eyes. "They say there is still a ghost in the machine. A fragment of the boy he was. The fragments have been weaponized," the handler replied coolly. "His knowledge of heroes, his analytical prowess, it is all ours to command. He is the key to dismantling the age of heroes from within." Strucker raised a hand and snapped his fingers. "Prove it." The handler faced the asset. Her voice was cold and clear, the trigger for the final lock in his mind to click into place. Serpent's coil. The asset's posture shifted, becoming infinitesimally more rigid. "Winter's bite." His gaze sharpened, focusing on a point in the far distance. "Iron's will." His hands, hanging loosely at his sides, curled into tight fists. "Order's dawn." All flicker of internal thought vanished from his eyes. He was a statue of flesh and blood, waiting for a command. The handler paused, then spoke the final, activating phrase. "Chimera report." The young man's head snapped up. His voice, when it came, was a monotone, devoid of inflection, a ghost of the voice that once excitedly mumbled about heroes. "Ready to comply." Strucker smiled, a predator's grin. "Excellent. We have a target. A high-ranking official in Japan's Hero Public Safety Commission is getting too close to our operations there. You will eliminate her and retrieve her files. Your first mission, Chimera. Do not fail." "Understood," Chimera said. There was no hesitation, no question. An order had been given. It would be followed. He turned and walked from the room with a silent, purposeful stride, his footsteps making no sound. He was Hydra's ultimate weapon, their serpent's fang, forged in the coldest fires of their cruelty. The boy who had wanted to be a hero was well and truly gone, and in his place stood a perfect, obedient monster. The rain fell on Tokyo in endless, shimmering sheets, turning the neon-drenched streets of Shinjuku into a watercolor painting of bleeding blues, electric pinks, and vibrant yellows. From the 60th floor of the Hero Public Safety Commission's central headquarters, the city below looked like a sprawling, beautiful circuit board, alive with the flow of a million lives. Inside, Commissioner Akane Yamamoto paid the view no mind. At 62, her hair was more salt than pepper, pulled back in a severe bun that brooked no argument. Her desk was an island of organized chaos, stacks of files and data slates arranged with geometric precision. The file currently under her gaze was thin, innocuous, yet it made the back of her neck prickle. It was titled, "Anomalous Financials, Pan-Global Conglomerates." For months she had been pulling at a single, stubborn thread. A series of shell corporations, laundered money, and untraceable tech acquisitions. Individually, they were nothing, but woven together, they formed the faint outline of something vast and predatory hiding just beneath the surface of their hero-saturated society. The heroes fought the flashy, public battles. Akane hunted the monsters that thrived in the quiet, dark places in between. "Working late again, Commissioner?" a voice asked from the doorway. It was Kenji Tanaka, a young, eager sidekick assigned to her security detail. His quirk, Harlight, allowed him to solidify photons into simple constructs. He was a good boy, full of the bright-eyed optimism she had long since traded for weary pragmatism. "The wolves are always busiest at night, Tanaka-kun," she said without looking up, tapping a finger on a particular name. Strucker. The name was old, European. It felt significant. "Well, Vigil and I are on the night shift. The building is on full lockdown, secure as ever. Not even a ghost could get in here," he said with a confident smile. Akane offered a tired, thin smile in return. I'm counting on it. Go on. Finish your patrol. As the sidekick walked away, his footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous hallway, Akane Yamamoto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. She had the distinct, unnerving feeling that she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was beginning to crumble. She would never know how right she was. Miles away, in a darkened, sterile room smelling of ozone and recycled air, the asset-designated Chimera finished his final systems check. He stood before a fragmented mirror, the black, ballistic weave material of his uniform absorbing the faint light. The armor was segmented, designed for maximum flexibility, with subtle lines of a dull, crimson red tracing the paths of his artificial quirk's energy channels. His boots were sound-dampening, his gloves textured for grip. On a table beside him lay his mask, a forbidding plate of reinforced alloy designed to cover his jaw and nose, distort his voice, and protect his identity. His HUD flickered to life inside his contact lenses, overlaying his vision with a stream of data. A floor plan of the HPSC tower. The patrol routes of the security staff. The calculated blind spots in the camera coverage. His mission parameters scrolled in crisp, white text. Primary objective, eliminate Akane Yamamoto. Secondary objective, retrieve encrypted data key. Tertiary objective, leave no trace. He picked up the mask. The metal was cold against his skin. As he clipped it into place, the world outside became muted, filtered. The boy with the freckles and the wild green hair disappeared completely, leaving only the weapon. His transport was a high-altitude, low-observable drone that detached him 1,000 feet above the HPSC tower. He fell through the storm like a black stone, the rain and wind a roaring tempest around him. There was no fear, no adrenaline. There was only the calculation of trajectory, wind speed, and impact timing. He landed on the slick glass roof with a whisper-soft thud that was swallowed by the thunder, his augmented legs absorbing the impact without a sound. He was a phantom, a creature born of the storm. The building was a fortress. Its exterior was lined with pressure sensors, thermal cameras, and quirk-detecting energy fields. To a normal intruder, it was impenetrable. To Chimera, it was a puzzle box, and Hydra had given him all the keys. He approached a maintenance panel, his fingers moving with practiced speed. He produced a small, spider-like device from a pouch on his belt and affixed it to the panel. The device's legs twitched, inserting microscopic needles into the building's fiber-optic network. On his HUD, lines of code scrolled past at an impossible speed. Security grid access. Granted. Camera feeds. Looping. Energy field. Deactivated. Sector G7, 120 seconds. He had 2 minutes. He moved to the edge of the roof, the city a dizzying abyss below. Without hesitation, he dropped over the side. His gloves, laced with a micro-suction polymer, adhered to the rain-slicked glass. He began his descent, moving from window to window with an unnatural, arachnid grace, a dark shape against the glittering tapestry of Tokyo, utterly invisible to the world below. He was the ghost Kenji Tanaka had so confidently dismissed. Inside, sidekicks Kenji Hardlight Tanaka and Emi Vigil Sato were making their rounds on the 59th floor, just below the commissioner's office. Vigil, whose quirk gave her heightened senses of hearing and smell, paused, her head tilting. "You hear that?" she whispered, her brow furrowed. Kenji stopped. "Hear what?" "It's a thunderstorm, Emi." "I hear thunder." "No, it's something else." "On the windows. Like a rhythmic tapping. But soft." Kenji rolled his eyes, a fond smile on his face. "You're just jumpy. This place is the safest building in Japan. Come on, let's check the server room and then we can grab some coffee." He turned and walked down the hall. Emi hesitated, straining her ears again. The sound was gone. Shaking her head, she chalked it up to the storm and followed him. Neither of them saw the shadow detach from the window behind them and melt into the alcove of a darkened doorway. Chimera had made it inside. He moved through the halls like a wraith. His steps were completely silent, his path weaving perfectly through the blind spots he had memorized. He was less a person and more a disruption in the air, a fleeting cold spot. The server room was his next target. The commissioner's office was on a closed network, the door sealed with a biometric lock that couldn't be bypassed remotely. He needed to physically access the floor's central hub. The server room was kept at a sub-zero temperature, the air humming with the sound of dozens of cooling fans. Kenji and Emi were just leaving as he approached, their conversation echoing down the hall. He flattened himself into the shadows, his body preternaturally still, until their footsteps faded. The lock on the server room was a standard electronic keypad. He didn't bother with codes. He placed his palm flat against the wall beside the door. A faint crimson glow emanated from his hand as he activated his quirk, absorbing the kinetic energy of the building itself, the hum of the servers, the vibration of the storm, the distant rumble of the subway system deep underground. He focused the absorbed energy into a single, tight, invisible pulse. It wasn't an explosion. It was a precisely calibrated vibration, tuned to the frequency of the lock's internal mechanism. The lock clicked open with a soft snick. Inside, he connected another Hydra device to the mainframe. Biometric lock, Office 6001. Override protocol initiated. Authorization. Forced. Door. Unlocked. He was almost there. As he exited the server room, he felt a subtle shift in the air pressure behind him. Freeze! He turned slowly. Kenji and Emi stood at the end of the hall, their stances wide, their faces a mixture of shock and aggression. Emi's nose was wrinkled. She must have caught his scent, the faint, sterile smell of his suit's material. I knew I heard something. She breathed, her eyes wide. I don't know who you are or how you got in here, Kenji said, his hands glowing as he formed a spear of solid, yellow light. But you're not going any further. Chimera remained silent. His HUD tagged them, analyzing their quirks based on Hydra's extensive database. HAR light, mid-range projectile and defense. Weakness, requires ambient light. Constructs are brittle under extreme force. Vigil, enhanced senses. No offensive capability. Low threat. His orders were to leave no trace. That meant no bodies. Incapacitation was the logical solution. Kenji lunged, thrusting his light spear forward. Chimera didn't move to dodge. He simply raised his forearm. The spear shattered against it with a sound like breaking glass, the light dissolving into harmless motes. Kenji stared in disbelief. Before the sidekick could react, Chimera closed the distance. He moved with a speed that was just on the edge of superhuman. He ducked under a wild swing from Kenji, his hand shooting out to grab the front of the young hero's uniform. He absorbed the kinetic energy of Kenji's own forward momentum, a faint red glow briefly illuminating his palm. He spun, using the momentum, and slammed Kenji into the wall. He released the stored energy in a controlled, concussive burst, not enough to kill, but more than enough to shatter the drywall and render the man unconscious. Kenji slumped to the floor in a heap. Kenji! Emi screamed, her training kicking in despite her fear. She pulled a capture weapon from her belt, a weighted net, and threw it. Chimera watched it fly towards him, his head tilting in an almost curious manner. He took a single step back, letting the net fall harmlessly at his feet. He then looked at Emi, his masked face betraying no emotion. For her, it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. This intruder wasn't angry, or manic, or greedy. He was empty. A void in human form. He took a step towards her. She scrambled backwards, fumbling for her radio. Intruder on the 59th floor! Officer down! I need back. He was on her before she could finish. He didn't punch her or throw her. He simply struck two precise points on her neck and shoulder with the stiffened fingers of one hand. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed, her call for help cut short. A perfect, non-lethal, nerve cluster shut down. He stepped over their unconscious bodies without a second glance. They were obstacles that had been overcome. Nothing more. The door to Commissioner Yamamoto's office hissed open. She looked up from her files, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the doorway was a figure clad in black, his face hidden behind a metal mask. He was utterly silent. Her hand moved instinctively towards the panic button under her desk, but she knew it was too late. The calm, methodical way he entered the room told her everything. This was not a smash-and-grab villain. This was an executioner. Who sent you? She asked, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. She would not die afraid. Was it Strucker? The masked figure did not respond. He simply walked towards her, his steps making no sound on the plush carpet. Rain lashed against the panoramic window behind her, a dramatic backdrop to her final moments. You think killing me will stop this? She continued, her voice rising with defiant fire. You think you can operate in the shadows forever? The light will find you. The heroes will. He was at her desk now. He raised his left hand, his palm open. A faint, ominous crimson light began to swirl in its center, gathering energy from the air itself. Akane Yamamoto stared into the emotionless lenses of his mask, and for the first time, she understood. He wasn't a man. He was a weapon. May you rot! She spat, her last words a curse. He clenched his fist, then snapped it open. There was no sound, no bang. Just a silent, invisible wave of force that shot across the desk. It struck her in the chest with the focused impact of a cannonball. The air was driven from her lungs in a single, violent burst. Her chair was blasted backwards, slamming into the reinforced window with enough force to send a spiderweb of cracks across the entire pane. Her body slumped, lifeless. Chimera stood for a moment, his internal sensors confirming the kill. Primary objective, complete. He walked around the desk, his gaze sweeping the room. He ignored the files, the computers, the personal effects. His HUD highlighted a small, metallic object on a chain around Akane's neck, tucked beneath her collar. The data key. He leaned down, his movements precise and detached, and unclasped it. He pocketed the key without looking at it. Secondary objective, complete. His mission was finished. Now, he just had to disappear. He turned to leave, his path taking him past the small lounge area adjoined to the office. A large television was mounted on the wall, its volume low, tuned to a 24-hour news channel. It was running a retrospective piece, a filler story for a slow news night. The title on the screen read, 10 Years of Peace, a look back at the symbol. On the screen was footage from a decade ago. All Might, in his absolute prime, his smile so bright it seemed to generate its own light source. He had just stopped a collapsing tower from falling into a crowded street. He stood amidst the rubble, giving a double thumbs up to the camera. Why do you do it, All Might? A reporter's voice asked from off-screen. The All Might on the TV laughed, a sound that echoed with effortless power and boundless optimism. Because I am here. To stand as a symbol. To give people hope, so they can go about their lives without fear. He pointed at the camera, his smile impossibly wide. Have no fear! Chimera stopped. It was not a conscious decision. His body simply froze mid-stride. His programming, his conditioning, his entire being was screaming at him to keep moving, to escape, to complete the mission. But he was paralyzed. The sound of that laugh, the sight of that smile, it bypassed the firewalls in his mind. It was a phantom key turning a phantom lock deep within his soul. For the briefest fraction of a second, the world tilted on its axis. He wasn't Chimera, the Hydra asset. He was a little boy in an All Might onesie, sitting too close to the TV, his eyes wide with wonder. He felt the phantom limb of a feeling, a ghost of warmth, of awe, of a desperate, all-consuming hope. His head tilted, a minute, almost imperceptible motion. A glitch in the system. On his HUD, a tiny, almost invisible icon flashed red in the corner of his vision. Biometric anomaly detected. Heart rate accelerated, 15 BPM. Neural activity, unexpected spike, prefrontal cortex. Logging event for review. The flash of red broke the spell. The memory, the feeling, whatever it was, shattered and dissolved back into the black void of his conditioning. The warmth vanished, replaced by the familiar, gnawing cold. He straightened his head, the moment of hesitation lasting no more than 1.7 seconds. But it had happened. A crack had appeared in the foundation of his programming. He turned from the television and walked out of the office, his movements once again fluid and silent. He retraced his steps, a ghost moving backwards through the fortress. He passed the unconscious bodies of the sidekicks without a glance. He scaled the exterior of the building, climbing back into the heart of the storm. The drone descended from the clouds to meet him, its engines a low, guttural hum that was lost in the thunder. As he was lifted away into the night sky, the first sirens began to wail in the streets far below. The ghost had vanished, leaving behind a murder, a mystery, and a city that was about to be gripped by fear. Tertiary objective, complete. The Hydra outpost was a sterile, modular facility hidden in the hold of a cargo freighter drifting in international waters. The air was cold and tasted of salt and steel. Chimera stood at attention in the center of a debriefing room, his mask removed, his face an emotionless slate. The data key he had retrieved sat on the steel table between him and the handler. She did not congratulate him on his success. Her icy gaze was fixed on a data slate in her hand, displaying the biometric log from his mission. Her finger was pointed at the 1.7-second anomaly. "Explain this," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Chimera stared straight ahead. "There is nothing to explain. Your heart rate accelerated. Your brain activity mirrored that of nostalgic recall. You deviated from your exfiltration path. You hesitated for 1.7 seconds. An eternity in the field." "Why?" He did not answer. The truth was he couldn't. The memory was already a blur, a confusing echo that his conditioning was actively working to suppress. He only knew that for a moment, he had felt something other than the cold, empty obedience that defined his existence. "It was the target," he said, his programming offering a logical, if false, explanation. Pre-mission intel did not indicate she was aware of Hydra's command structure. Her mention of Strucker was an unexpected variable. The handler stared at him, her eyes narrowing. She knew he was lying, or rather, that his programming was lying for him to protect its own integrity. She cross-referenced the event's timestamp with the building's internal data feeds, which Hydra had been monitoring. Her screen displayed the image from the television in the lounge. All Might's smiling face. "I see," she said, her voice dropping even colder. "The ghost in the machine. A sentimental attachment. A loose thread from the boy you were." She stood up and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. "We do not tolerate loose threads, Chimera. They are weaknesses. And we burn our weaknesses away." She pressed a button on the wall. 2 heavily armed Hydra guards entered the room. "Take the asset to the calibration chamber. Full cycle. Erase the anomaly." Chimera did not protest. He did not flinch. He simply turned and walked with the guards, his face a perfect mask of compliance. As he was led down the cold, steel corridor, he passed a small porthole. For a moment, he could see the dark, churning ocean outside, vast and unforgiving. He felt a flicker of something, a strange resonance with the cold, deep, and empty expanse. He was taken to a room he knew all too well. He was strapped into the chair. The heavy, helmet-like device was lowered over his head, blocking out the light. He knew what was coming. The pain. The noise. The electricity that would scour his mind clean, searching for the tiny, flickering ember of his zucchimideria and snuffing it out. As the machine began to hum, a single, fragmented image flashed in his mind's eye, a bright, heroic smile and a booming, joyful laugh. Then the electricity hit, and the world dissolved into white-hot, screaming agony. The recalibration was a success. The anomaly was purged. The weapon was reset to its factory settings. When he was released, his eyes were as empty as they had ever been. The crack had been paved over with pain and obedience. But deep beneath the surface, in the scorched and buried foundations of his mind, the crack remained. A structural weakness waiting for the right frequency to shatter it all. For now, however, there was no weakness. There was only the mission. There was only Hydra. The murder of a high-ranking public official was not, in itself, an unprecedented event in a world populated by supervillains. What was unprecedented was the silence. There was no declaration of victory from a cackling megalomaniac, no manifesto plastered across the dark web by an anarchist group, no telltale energy signature left behind for scientists to dissect. The death of Commissioner Akane Yamamoto was a perfect, sterile void, and the media, like nature, abhorred a vacuum. Within 12 hours, every news network in Japan was running the story on a loop. The scant details released by the police were sensationalized and spun into a dozen different theories. They had a name for the killer, a moniker born from the absolute lack of evidence: the Tokyo Ghost. The name stuck, capturing the public's imagination and fear. The ghost was a phantom, an urban legend brought to terrifying life, an assassin who could bypass the most advanced security systems on the planet and vanish without a trace. Hero society, an ecosystem built on the spectacle of power and the certainty of justice, found itself on the back foot. The usual methods, tracking a quirk signature, analyzing a villain's psychological profile, following a trail of destruction, were useless. The ghost had left nothing. The silence from the perpetrator was more unnerving than any threat. It was the cold, calculated silence of a predator that had already returned to the shadows, confident that it could not be found. For the heroes and the police, the investigation was not a manhunt. It was an attempt to solve an equation with no known variables. The conference room at the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department was thick with the smell of stale coffee and rising tension. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi stood before a large digital whiteboard, his face grim, his posture radiating a bone-deep weariness. He clicked a button on his remote, and a grainy, corrupted image appeared on the screen. It was a still from a security camera on the 59th floor of the HPSC tower, timestamped just minutes before the estimated time of death. The image showed a dark, indistinct figure standing over the unconscious form of the sidekick Hard-Light. "This is all we have," Tsukachi said, his voice gravelly. "One frame." The ghost's infiltration software was flawless. It looped the feeds for every camera in that building, but for a single, glitched frame, it showed us this. No face, no clear features. Just a silhouette. He gestured to another part of the board, where the medical examiner's preliminary report was displayed. "The two sidekicks on duty, Tanaka and Sato, are alive and in stable condition. Tanaka has a severe concussion and 3 fractured ribs. Sato was rendered unconscious by a precise, non-lethal strike to a nerve cluster in her neck. Both of them, according to my quirk, are telling the absolute, unvarnished truth. They were neutralized in seconds by an opponent who was faster, stronger, and more skilled than anyone they had ever encountered. They describe him as moving with no wasted energy. A professional." He paused, letting the weight of that word settle in the room. "Commissioner Yamamoto was not so lucky. Cause of death is listed as catastrophic internal trauma caused by a single, focused application of kinetic force to the chest. No exit wound. No energy residue. No radiation. It's as if she was hit by a ghost train." An older, grizzled officer in the back of the room shook his head. "It has to be a quirk. Some kind of vibration or force projection quirk. We've run the description of the effect through the National Quirk Registry." Tsukachi countered, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We've found over 200 quirks with similar properties. We've checked the alibis of every single registered owner. All of them are clean. This suggests one of 2 possibilities. Either our killer is an unregistered quirk user of immense skill, or we are dealing with a quirk that has never been seen before." The room was silent. Both possibilities were terrifying. An unregistered quirk user this powerful slipping through the cracks was a systemic failure of the highest order. A completely new quirk meant they were dealing with a complete unknown, a variable that could not be predicted or countered. "There's more," Tsukachi continued, his expression darkening further. "The infiltration. The HPSC tower is a fortress. The ghost bypassed its security not with brute force, but with surgical precision. The tech he used to loop the cameras and override the locks. It's military grade. Beyond military grade, even. Our cybercrimes unit can't even trace its digital signature. It's like it was never there. This wasn't a villain attack. This was a Black Ops mission." The implication hung heavy in the air. Villains, for all their chaos, were a known quantity. They had egos, motives, patterns. This was something else. Something cold, organized, and terrifyingly sophisticated. Tsukachi looked at the faces of his fellow officers, saw the frustration and the creeping fear. He knew the police couldn't handle this alone. The equation was missing too many pieces. He needed a different kind of mind to look at the problem. "Get me a secure line to Yui High School," he said to his subordinate. "I need to speak with Principal Nizu." The strategic briefing room at Yui was a space rarely used. Reserved for crises of the highest level, it was a circular chamber with a large holographic display table at its center. The air was cool and still. Here, 3 of the most formidable minds in Japan's hero world were gathered, staring at the same unsolvable equation that had stumped the police. Principal Nizu, a creature whose high-spec brain hummed with constant, complex calculations, sat in a custom-built chair, a cup of tea held delicately in his paws. His beady black eyes were fixed on the holographic projection of the crime scene, his expression an unreadable mix of intellectual curiosity and deep concern. Shota Aizawa, also known as the pro-hero Eraserhead, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his perpetually tired eyes narrowed in intense focus. The shadows of the room seemed to cling to him. He was a man who lived and breathed the dark, unglamorous underbelly of hero work, and everything about this case felt deeply, horribly wrong to him. And then there was Tashinori Yagi, the man who had been All Might. He sat hunched in a simple chair, looking frail and small in his oversized suit. Since his retirement, he had taken on a teaching role at UA, but the weight of his past life was a physical presence. He looked at the details of the assassination, and a familiar, bitter guilt churned in his gut. This was the kind of evil that festered in the vacuum left by a fading symbol. This was the world he had left behind. The precision is what troubles me most, Nizu said, his calm, cheerful voice a stark contrast to the grim subject matter. He gestured a paw at the hologram, which now showed a 3D schematic of the HPSC tower. The target was specific. The infiltration route was optimized to the centimeter, exploiting blind spots that only the building's architect should have known. The technology is untraceable. This is not the work of a single, brilliant individual. He took a sip of his tea. This is the work of an organization. One with immense resources, military-level discipline, and a deep, intrinsic understanding of our society's infrastructure and its weaknesses. Aizawa pushed himself off the wall. The fighting style, too, he rasped, his voice low and gravelly. Or rather, the lack of one. The sidekicks said he didn't fight, he processed them, he identified their threat level and neutralized them with the minimum energy required. Non-lethal force for the guards, lethal force for the target. That's not anger. That's not ideology. That's protocol. He looked at the others, his eyes burning with a cold fire. I've spent my life in the gutters, fighting every kind of villain you can imagine. They're loud. They're boastful. They have patterns, tells. Even the most intelligent ones have an ego. This ghost, he has none. He's a scalpel in the dark. The kind of operative you read about in old-world spy novels, not the kind you see on the evening news. Tashinori Yagi coughed, a racking sound that brought a fleck of blood to his lips. He wiped it away with a handkerchief. And the quirk, he said, his voice thin but firm, to kill with a focused blast of kinetic energy. It's monstrously powerful, but the control required is staggering. To use it so precisely, without any collateral damage, the training must have been relentless. Nizu brought up the single, grainy frame of the ghost on the main screen. The three of them stared at the dark silhouette. It was of average height, with a lean, athletic build. Nothing about it was remarkable, which was in itself remarkable. What do you see, Tashinori? Nizu asked, his gaze sharp. Tashinori leaned forward, his eyes squinting at the blurry image. He saw nothing. A shape. A weapon. But as he stared, a strange, unwelcome feeling began to crawl up his spine. It was a phantom itch, a flicker of something on the very edge of his memory. The way the figure's shoulders were slightly hunched, the posture not of a brawler but of an observer, the slight tilt of the head, as if analyzing the situation before acting. It reminded him of. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. It was ridiculous. He was projecting. His mind was playing tricks on him, connecting this new darkness to his greatest failure. I see a threat unlike any we have faced before, Tashinori said, his voice heavy. A threat that has risen in the quiet. Perhaps if I were still. This is not on you, Tashinori. Aizawa cut in, his tone sharp but not unkind. An enemy like this doesn't appear overnight. They've been building, planning, waiting. Your presence may have kept them in the shadows, but it wouldn't have stopped them from existing. But Tashinori couldn't shake the feeling. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his ruined lungs. Every day, he walked the halls of UA, a school filled with bright, hopeful children striving to become heroes. And every day, he was haunted by the memory of a different child. A boy with wide, desperate green eyes and a storm of untamed green hair, standing on a rooftop, his dream held out like a fragile bird in his hands. "Can someone without a quirk become a hero like you?" He could still hear the boy's voice, trembling but full of a fire that defied his diagnosis. And he remembered his own words, cold, practical, and utterly devastating. "No. You need to be realistic." He had crushed that boy's spirit. He had walked away, telling himself it was for the boy's own good, a kindness to prevent him from getting himself killed. But what had happened to him? Had he found a different path? Had he found peace? Or had that fire simply gone out, leaving behind an empty, bitter shell? The thought was a constant, dull ache in his soul. He had failed as a commiteria, and he had to live with that knowledge every single day. "The lack of evidence is the evidence," Nisa said, pulling Toshinori from his guilt-ridden reverie. The principal's eyes gleamed with a ferocious intelligence. "The fact that we can trace nothing tells us everything. We are not dealing with an organization from our world, the world of heroes and villains. We are dealing with something from the world that came before it. Something that has learned to adapt, to hide within the cracks of our society." He turned to Aizawa. "Shota, I want you to start looking into old case files. Pre-Quirk era intelligence agency reports. Cold War era ghost cells. Anything that speaks of deep cover organizations with a global reach. Look for a symbol, a name, anything." He then turned to Toshinori. "And I want you to reach out to your old contacts. David Shield in the US. Your friends in the European hero agencies. See if they've detected any similar ripples. An assassination this clean feels like a test run. The prelude to something much larger." The investigation had hit a wall, so Nisa was simply going to start digging a new tunnel. The days bled into a week. The media frenzy over the Tokyo ghosts reached a fever pitch, then slowly began to subside, replaced by the next sensational story. But within the walls of the police department and UA, the investigation ground on, a frustrating, fruitless exercise. Aizawa spent his nights digging through dusty, digitized archives, his eyes burning from screen fatigue. He found whispers and rumors, stories of a shadowy cabal obsessed with world order, identified only by a terrifying symbol, a skull with grasping tentacles. Hydra. But every official report concluded the same thing. The organization had been dismantled decades ago, a relic of a bygone era. The leads were ghosts, stories to frighten rookies. Toshinori made the calls. His old friends and allies listened with concern, but they had nothing to offer. There were no similar incidents. No whispers of a new player on the world stage. The Tokyo ghost, it seemed, was a uniquely Japanese problem. The dead end was global. Tsukachi, meanwhile, followed the money. Commissioner Yamamoto's files had hinted at anomalous financial activities. He and his team spent hundreds of hours tracing the labyrinthine paths of shell corporations and offshore accounts. But it was like chasing smoke. Every time they thought they had a solid lead, it would dissolve into another anonymous holding company, another encrypted server, another dead end. The organization behind the ghost had built a financial fortress as impenetrable as the one their assassin had breached. The equation remained unsolvable. They had no weapon, no motive beyond destabilization, no suspect, and no organization to pin it on. The ghost had committed the perfect murder, and had simply ceased to exist. One afternoon, Toshinori was walking across the UE training grounds, his mind a whirlwind of frustration. He watched as the students of Class 1A ran through a combat drill. He saw young Bakugo, his explosions as brilliant and ferocious as ever, a prodigy in the making. He saw young Todoroki, his mastery of fire and ice a beautiful, deadly dance. He saw the fierce determination in Uraraka's eyes, the unshakable resolve of Ida. They were the future. Bright, powerful, full of limitless potential. His gaze drifted, and he saw a student from the General Studies course sitting on a bench, furiously scribbling in a notebook. The student had a shock of messy purple hair, but for a split second, in the angle of his head and the intense focus of his scribbling, Toshinori saw another boy, a boy with green hair, a notebook titled, Hero Analysis for the Future, and a soul-deep desire to understand what it meant to be a hero. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. What happened to you, young Midoriya? He thought, the question a silent, desperate prayer. I hope you found a way to be happy. I hope you understood. He stood there for a long time, a skeletal old man watching a new generation of heroes rise, haunted by the ghost of the one he had failed. He was completely, blissfully unaware that the unsolvable equation tormenting him, the professional killer who moved with inhuman precision, the phantom that had plunged Tokyo into a state of quiet terror, and the ghost of the boy on the rooftop were one and the same. The answer to his greatest mystery was inextricably tied to his greatest regret, a horrifying truth hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment it would finally be revealed. Back in his office, Nisa stared at a large, holographic map of Tokyo. The HPSC tower was marked with a single, blinking red dot. He tapped a command, and lines of data began to flow from the dot. Power grid schematics, communications networks, traffic patterns. You did not choose your target at random. The principal murmured to the empty room, speaking to the ghost himself. You chose the nerve center. You did not use a bomb, you used a scalpel. This was not an act of terror. It was a statement. A demonstration of capability. He zoomed out, the map of Tokyo shrinking to a map of Japan, then a map of the world. You've shown us a single piece of an equation, and you've challenged us to solve it, knowing we can't. He whispered, his small, furry face grim. But every equation has a solution. We are not hunting a man, we are hunting a phantom. And our problem is, we do not have the tools to catch a ghost. He paused, a dangerous glint in his eye. So, we will have to invent them. The structure rose from the reclaimed land of the Yokohama waterfront like a shard of polished obsidian. It was officially designated the Island Annex, a satellite research and development facility funded by a joint venture between the Hero Public Safety Commission and David Shield's Premier Support Item Company. Inside its sterile, climate-controlled walls, the future of heroics was being forged in alloys and advanced polymers. It housed prototypes for next-generation capture weapons, experimental armor composites designed to withstand esoteric quirks, and the schematics for support gear that would one day be worn by the nation's top 10 heroes. It was, as Principal Nisa had theorized, the next logical target. A strike here would not just be a theft. It would be a crippling blow to the hero's technological advantage. It was a strategic move, and the Tokyo Ghost was nothing if not strategic. For that reason, the Annex was currently the most heavily guarded location in all of Japan. But the security was not a public spectacle. There were no fleets of police cars or cordons of flashy heroes. The defense was quiet, layered, and deadly serious. It was a trap, baited with the most valuable technology in the country, and waiting at its center was a man who thrived in the silent dark. Shota Aizawa stood on a gantry overlooking the primary research and development floor, a cavernous space filled with robotic arms, fabrication units, and holographic design tables. The only light came from the soft blue glow of standby consoles, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. He was a creature of these shadows, his black costume making him almost invisible against the dark machinery. Man, this waiting game is a total drag. A voice crackled in his earpiece, far too loud for the oppressive silence. You sure your Phantom Menace is even gonna show, Eraser? We've been here for 6 hours. My throat's getting dry just from not screaming. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose, a familiar gesture of weary exasperation. Mike, for the last time, maintain radio silence unless you have something to report. And turn your volume down. We're not at a rock concert. He's just nervous, Shota. Another, more sultry voice purred over the comms. It was Namuri Kiyama, the pro-hero Midnight, concealed in the ventilation control room 2 floors above. Hisashi gets chatty when he's tense. It's better than him stress-eating all the emergency rations. Hey! I can hear you! Hisashi Yamada, present Mike, protested from his position near the main entrance, where he was disguised as a night shift security guard. That's the point, Aizawa and Namuri said in unison. Aizawa let out a long, slow breath, the vapor pluming in the cold air. Nisa's plan was sound. They had allowed a calculated leak of information regarding a breakthrough in impact absorption technology to filter through back channels, a piece of bait too tempting for an enemy interested in kinetic energy to ignore. Now, the 3 of them, along with a dozen elite undercover officers, were the jaws of the trap. But Aizawa felt a knot of unease in his stomach. They were hunting something that had outsmarted the HPSC's best and brightest. They were hunting a ghost, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were the ones who were truly being haunted. He was a logical man, a pragmatist to his core. But everything about this case defied logic. The surgical precision, the untraceable tech, the complete lack of a psychological profile, it was a void. And staring into a void for too long could be dangerous. His eyes scanned the RD floor below. His gaze was his greatest weapon, and he missed nothing. The slight shimmer of dust motes in the air, the steady blink of a server light, the low, almost subaudible hum of the facility's power core. Everything was normal. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. He keyed his comm. Midnight report. Air quality and pressure. Everything's green, eraser. Demuri's voice replied. Air filtration is nominal. Pressure is stable across all sectors. Wait. There was a pause. That's odd. There was a momentary pressure fluctuation in the sublevel coolant system. A drop of 0.02%. Probably a compressor kicking in. Aizawa went perfectly still. A 0.02% drop was within standard deviation. It was nothing. A glitch. But the ghost didn't make grand entrances. The ghost would be a glitch. Where does the primary coolant intake pipe lead? He asked, his voice now a low, urgent rasp. It draws water directly from the bay, runs it through a filtration and cooling hub in the sub-basement, then circulates it through the building's core to cool the main servers. And from that hub? Aizawa pressed. Another pause, then Nemuri's voice, sharp with realization. It connects to the maintenance vent system. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Aizawa was already moving, dropping from the gantry in a silent crouch. He's not coming through the door, Mike. He's already inside. Chimera moved through the cramped, labyrinthine ventilation shafts with the silent, fluid grace of a serpent. The space was tight, filled with pipes and wiring, but his enhanced physiology allowed him to contort his body in ways that would be impossible for a normal man. His HUD painted the path ahead in a pale green overlay, highlighting structural supports and electrical conduits. The coolant intake pipe had been the logical, and most overlooked, point of entry. Hydra's intel had identified it as the only part of the facility's exterior not hard-lined with quirk detection sensors, relying instead on a simple pressure gauge. His entry had caused a negligible fluctuation, a whisper in the building's symphony of systems. His objective was the central server core on the main RD floor. It contained the schematics he was sent to acquire, but more importantly, it was the perfect place to plant the virus that would sabotage the facility. A data-scrambling worm that would corrupt every project file and set the hero's RD back by at least 5 years. He reached a grate that overlooked the RD floor. He saw the gantry where Aizawa had been standing moments before, now empty. His internal sensors picked up the faint traces of the hero's scent. He cross-referenced it with Hydra's database. Match found, Pro-Hero Eraser Head. Quirk, Erasure. Threat Level, Alpha. Match found, Pro-Hero Midnight. Quirk, Somnambulist. Threat Level, Beta, Mitigatable. Match found, Pro-Hero Present Mike. Quirk Voice. Threat Level, Alpha. He processed the information with cold detachment. The presence of 3 high-level pro-heroes meant the facility was not merely guarded. It was a deliberately set trap. His mission parameters shifted. Stealth was compromised. The new priority was to achieve the primary objective with maximum efficiency and force. He dropped from the vent, landing on the polished concrete floor without a sound. The cavernous room was still and silent, but he could feel them. 3 sets of breathing, 3 heartbeats, hidden in the shadows. They were waiting for him to make a move. He strode towards the server core, a monolithic black tower in the center of the room, his steps calm and measured. It was a challenge. Here I am. Come and stop me. The first attack came from the air itself. A faint, sweet-smelling purple mist began to seep from the overhead vents, converging on his position. Midnight's Somnambulist Quirk. A potent weapon against most opponents, designed to put them to sleep before a fight could even begin. Chimera didn't even break his stride. A soft hiss emanated from his mask as an internal rebreather system engaged, its filters instantly neutralizing the airborne agent. His HUD flashed a notification, aerotoxin detected. Filtration system active. Hydra had anticipated this. They had anticipated everything. In the control room, Nemuri's eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the figure walk through her quirk's effect as if it were harmless steam. He's immune! His mask must have a filtration unit! The second attack was a full frontal assault. From the shadows near the main entrance, Present Mike burst forward, his directional speaker already primed. Yea-awaya! A bone-jarring wave of pure sound erupted from the hero, a concussive force powerful enough to shatter glass and pulverize concrete. It was an overwhelming attack, designed to stun and disorient, a sonic sledgehammer. The sound wave slammed into Chimera. But it didn't send him flying. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The air around him seemed to warp and shimmer. The sound was not deflecting, it was being absorbed. A deep, crimson light pulsed from the nexus on his chest, and the red lines on his suit glowed with a terrifying intensity. He took a single, bracing step back, his body absorbing the kinetic energy of the sound itself. Mick's scream died in his throat, his face a mask of utter shock. No way! He's eating it! Chimera's head tilted. He had absorbed a massive amount of energy. The logical course of action was to redirect it. He raised his right hand, palm open, towards the stunned hero. He released the stored sonic energy not as a wave, but as a focused, invisible cannonball of force. Hizashi only had time to throw his arms up in a desperate attempt to block. The blast hit him square in the chest. It didn't send him flying, it simply punched through his defense. He was lifted off his feet and thrown backwards a full 30 feet, crashing into a row of equipment racks with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. He slumped to the ground, smoke rising from his directional speaker, unconscious. Mike! Aizawa roared, his voice raw with fury and concern. He launched himself from the shadows, his long gray capture weapon lashing out like a striking snake. This was it. The real fight. As Aizawa's feet hit the floor, his eyes flared red, his hair floating upwards. He activated his quirk. He saw the faint crimson glow around the ghost flicker and die. Got you. The capture weapon, a carbon fiber and steel alloy weave, wrapped around Chimera's torso and arms, pulling tight. Aizawa used his momentum, planting his feet and pulling with all his strength, intending to slam the assassin into the ground. It was like pulling against a mountain. Even without his quirk, the ghost's strength was immense. He grunted, a low, animalistic sound, and dug his heels into the concrete, resisting Aizawa's pull. The super-soldier serum coursing through his veins made him a physical powerhouse. Aizawa's quirk could level the playing field, but it couldn't erase raw, brute strength. Chimera grabbed the capture weapon with both hands and pulled. Aizawa, caught off guard by the sheer force, was yanked forward, stumbling. The assassin was a whirlwind of motion. He twisted, using Aizawa's own weapon for leverage, and spun the hero through the air, smashing him into a large control console. Sparks flew as Aizawa's body shattered the screens. Pain exploded in Aizawa's shoulder, but he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to keep his eyes open, to keep his quirk active. He scrambled to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The ghost was already on him, a black-clad blur of motion. What followed was a desperate, brutal ballet of close-quarters combat. Aizawa was a master of CQC, his style built around disabling opponents quickly and efficiently using his capture weapon and martial arts. But the ghost was his equal, if not his superior. Every move Aizawa made was countered with terrifying precision. A jab was parried, a kick was deflected. The ghost's fighting style was a cold, efficient hybrid of a dozen different martial arts, each movement designed for maximum damage with minimum effort. He fought not like a man, but like a machine built for one purpose: combat. Who are you? Aizawa grunted, ducking under a sweeping kick that would have taken his head off. The only answer was the whisper of moving fabric and the dull thud of a fist against his ribs. The blow was solid, inhumanly so. It felt like being hit with a steel girder. Aizawa gasped, the wind knocked out of him. He had to blink. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. In that instant, Chimera's quirk flared back to life. Aizawa's next punch, a desperate right hook, landed squarely on the ghost's shoulder. Instead of staggering him, the assassin's body absorbed the impact, a red glow pulsing under his suit. Chimera's left hand shot out, grabbing Aizawa by the throat and lifting him off the ground. Aizawa's eyes widened in horror. He couldn't breathe. He stared into the impassive, black lenses of the ghost's mask, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sliver of genuine fear. This thing was going to kill him, but Chimera didn't crush his throat. He simply held him there for a moment, then threw him across the room. Aizawa crashed through a table of prototypes, his body skidding across the floor amidst a shower of broken metal and plastic. His head was spinning, black spots dancing in his vision. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his body a symphony of pain. He saw the ghost turn his back on him and start walking towards the server core again, as if Aizawa was no longer a relevant threat. That dismissal, that cold, calculated disregard, fueled a surge of defiant rage in the underground hero. No. I'm not done. He struggled to his feet, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. He knew he couldn't win in a direct confrontation. The ghost was stronger, faster, and his quirk was a perfect counter to most heroes. He had to end this now. All or nothing. He activated Erasure again, his dry eyes screaming in protest. The ghost's faint energy signature vanished once more. Aizawa launched himself forward, not to attack, but to grapple. He poured every ounce of his remaining strength into a final, desperate gambit. He didn't try to punch or kick. He simply crashed into the assassin, wrapping his arms and legs around him in a flying tackle. At the same time, he expertly manipulated his capture weapon with his hands, looping it around the ghost's limbs, his torso, his neck, binding them together in a tight, inescapable cocoon of carbon fiber. They hit the ground hard, a tangle of limbs and cloth. The ghost struggled, his augmented muscles straining against the bonds, but Aizawa's technique was perfect. He was completely immobilized, but Aizawa knew it wouldn't last. He couldn't keep his quirk active forever. The moment he blinked, the ghost would unleash all the kinetic energy he had absorbed and blast his way free. Aizawa had to incapacitate him now. With a final, desperate roar, he got his feet under him, lifted the bound assassin, and swung him around. He put every last bit of his strength, his desperation, and his rage into one final, brutal action. He swung the ghost like a battering ram into the side of a massive, solid steel fabrication machine, a piece of equipment bolted directly to the reinforced concrete floor. The impact was sickening. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the cavernous room, a sound of immense force meeting an immovable object. The assassin's body went limp. Aizawa, utterly spent, collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His erasure finally gave out, his eyes burning as if they'd been filled with sand. He had done it. He had actually done it. He looked at the still form of the ghost, slumped against the machine. And then he saw it. A crack had formed in the assassin's ala mask. It spread, spiderwebbing across the metal. With a final, sharp click, a large piece of the mask, the entire lower section, broke off. It clattered onto the concrete floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. And the ghost's face was revealed. Time seemed to stop. Aizawa stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It wasn't the face of a hardened killer. It wasn't the scarred, cruel visage of a monster. It was the face of a boy. A teenager. He couldn't be any older than the students Aizawa taught every day at UA. He had a soft, round jawline, a spray of freckles across his cheeks and the bridge of his nose, and a mop of messy, dark green hair that fell across his forehead. His eyes fluttered open, not with rage or hate, but with a dazed, profound confusion. They were green. A deep, haunted, soul-crushingly familiar green. From across the room, Midnight, who had shaken off the initial shock of her ineffective quirk, had come to support Aizawa. She too froze, her hand flying to her mouth, a horrified gasp escaping her lips. "My God!" she whispered. "He's just a child." Aizawa couldn't speak. He couldn't move. The entire context of the battle, of the investigation, of the Tokyo Ghost itself, had just been shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't a supervillain. This wasn't a Black Ops soldier. This was a kid. A broken, weaponized child whose eyes held the emptiness of a 1,000-yard stare. For the ghost, the shock was of a different kind. The cold air on his unprotected face was a novel, alien sensation. The direct, horrified stare from his opponent was a stimulus his programming had no protocol for. He saw the hero's face, the blood, the exhaustion, the utter disbelief. He saw the woman's face, the horror, the pity. These raw, human emotions were a chaotic data stream he couldn't parse, and deep within the buried catacombs of his mind, a single, fragmented word echoed. A name. Izuku. The internal conflict caused a system-wide error. The chimera programming, faced with an unsolvable emotional paradox, reasserted its dominance through its most basic directive, survival. The hero's shock was his opportunity. His eyes, which had for a moment held a flicker of lost confusion, went cold and empty again. The crimson light flared to life in his chest, brighter and more violent than ever before. He had absorbed a staggering amount of kinetic energy during the fight. Mick's scream, Aizawa's punches, and most of all, the bone-shattering final impact against the fabricator. He unleashed it all. It was not a focus blast. It was a wave. A silent, omnidirectional explosion of pure kinetic force. Aizawa saw the light and knew what was coming. "Get down!" he screamed, tackling Midnight and pulling her behind the heavy machine. The world dissolved into a cacophony of groaning, shearing metal and shattering concrete. The shockwave ripped through the RD floor with the force of a bomb. Consoles exploded. Heavy machinery was torn from its moorings. The gantry Aizawa had been standing on earlier twisted and collapsed. The entire ceiling above them groaned, and a huge section of it broke away, crashing down onto the floor in a cloud of dust and debris. When the chaos subsided, the room was a wreck. A thick haze of dust filled the air, smelling of ozone and pulverized concrete. Aizawa pushed a piece of rubble off his back, his ears ringing, his body a single, screaming nerve of pain. "Namuri? You okay?" he rasped. I'm alive." She coughed from beside him, covered in dust. Aizawa slowly, painfully, got to his feet and looked at the spot where the assassin had been. He was gone. The capture weapon lay on the floor in a tangled, empty heap. The broken piece of the mask was still there, a single, damning piece of evidence. But the ghost himself had vanished into the chaos he had created. Aizawa stumbled forward, his legs unsteady, and knelt down. He picked up the piece of the mask, the alloy cool and smooth in his trembling hand. He stood up and stared into the dust-filled crater where the server core used to be, now just a tangled mess of sparking wires. The trap had failed. The ghost had escaped. But as Aizawa stood there, amidst the ruins of their operation, the mission was the last thing on his mind. He wasn't thinking about the stolen data or the sabotaged facility. He was thinking about the face, the spray of freckles, the haunted, empty green eyes. The face of a boy who should be in a classroom, not a kill zone. The image was burned into his memory, seared onto the back of his eyelids. The unsolvable equation had a new variable now, and it was 1,000 times more terrifying than any phantom. It was the face of a child. And Shota Aizawa knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the very marrow of his bones, that he would see that face again in his nightmares.